Before we went into this shelter-in-place protocol on the back of the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, I had the privilege of traveling all over the world to speak to leaders about the pearls, as I like to call them, my hard-earned and hard-learned pearls. And inevitably, when I would arrive on somebody's campus at their headquarters, they would ask me if I would spend some time with the CEO and his or her direct reports. And inevitably, behind closed doors, the question would come up, how do you show up as an inclusive leader? You know, I understand it intellectually, I've read about it, but how do you manifest that? How do you walk that walk every day? And here's a tip I'd like to give you. If you'd like to show up as an inclusive leader every day, why don't you try this? The next 4 times that you bring your teams together, you might start the conversation this way. Listen, here's the conversation that we're going to have today. I'll get us started, not because I'm the smartest person in the room, but because I'm the most seasoned person in the room. And I'd like you, Abby, to add on to this conversation. And Bill, I'd like you to add on to what Abby has said. Now, Chandra, I'd like you to completely blow up this argument. Let's play the devil's advocate. What's the other argument? Where are the gaps here? And Damon, I'd like you to add on to what Chandra has done. What have you done? You have done 2 very powerful things as an influential, impactful leader. Number 1, you have said, I see you, because you invited each of them into the conversation by name, which means, leaders, that you must authentically engage enough with your teams that you can then invite them into the conversation by name. And who doesn't value being seen by the boss? The second important thing that you've done is that you've said, I hear you. Not only did you invite them into the conversation by name, you invited them specifically to support or refute the argument that was on the floor. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Everybody values being heard. Everybody values being heard. When you say to anyone, I hear you, you generate immediate currency in that exchange, currency that you can now reinvest back into that relationship. But here's the intended consequence of what you've done. Leaders, you have now put everybody's fingerprints on the blueprint. Everybody on your team is equally invested in the success or the failure of that endeavor. And it doesn't get any better than that.
Our next summit speaker leads one of the largest church congregations in the United States. A.R. Bernard is the pastor of the Christian Cultural Center in Brooklyn, New York. Before that, A.R. Bernard led a successful financial career and served with the NYC Economic Development Corporation and the NYC School Chancellor's Advisory Cabinet. In addition to being an author, A.R. Bernard has been featured as a thought leader on numerous major TV networks, and he's a radio host for the New York-based program The Rev and the Rabbi. Through the Christian Cultural Center, in partnership with the Gotham organization, A.R. Bernard helped to create over 2,000 units of income-based workforce housing, community service spaces, and healthcare and educational facilities for communities in need. In this interview with Paula Ferris, we'll hear answers to the challenges and complex decisions that define the leaders of today. That's why the Global Leadership Summit is grateful to welcome A.R. Bernard.
You cannot solve a problem at the same level.
Hey, everybody. Give a warm welcome for the Reverend.
Good morning.
We're so excited.
Or good afternoon, wherever.
Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be watching. Yeah. It is so great to have you. We're going to have a great conversation. We might as well, Reverend, just call this conversation We're Going There. Because when I think of someone that has influence, not just in the political sphere or the religious sphere, the religious arenas, the celebrity arena, I think of you. You have sat on multiple boards, councils, and you are the ultimate commensurate bridge builder. That's what you do. You bridge bridge the gaps, and that's what we're going to talk about today. What's the importance of building bridges? Let's connect the dots between faith and culture. So, are you ready to go there?
Okay, where do you want to go?
But before we do, I want to say welcome back. because we have a little surprise. You spoke in 2004. Was anyone here in the house when the Reverend spoke in 2004? All right, so you may remember a little bit of this. So let's roll that tape.
Always have 10 people in the crowd who know who I am. That's great. Thank you.
Let's watch the video.
Albert Einstein said, "You cannot solve a problem at the same level at which it was created." So the nature of problem solving is to move you, force you to another level just by engaging in solving the problem.
So good. So my first question's a hard-hitting question. How does it feel to be back at the Global Leadership Summit, Reverend?
It feels great. I mean, you know, I love progress. I love the fact that, you know, we live life on levels, arrive in stages, and GLS has gone through so many levels and stages over the last 17 years since I've been here.
It's been 17 years.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's good to be here, good to be with you.
Thank you. It's just my pleasure. So let's dive right in. You're the ultimate bridge builder. Why is it important to build bridges? I know you believe in diverse perspectives and agendas, but for everyone listening, why do we need to build bridges, especially in this moment in culture right now?
I think that's the nature, and of course this is my Christian worldview, the lens through which I see the world and understand and process things. We are social beings. We are to work together. Nothing can be accomplished alone. So the fact that we are, you know, wounded, broken individuals in some way,
Right.
we need each other. We need to work together. So building bridges is about finding common ground. It's finding the place of agreement. Jesus, if I may quote him, he said, you know, if two of you agree on earth concerning anything they ask, it will be granted in heaven. So agreement is the place of power, and disagreement is the place of powerlessness. You can't get anything done. There is no empowerment when we're in disagreement. So it's about finding common ground. Common ground creates a pathway for communication.
Right. So where do you even start, though? I think that's the challenge often that I have, and that maybe some of those watching in the room that we have. Where do we even start, not just to find common ground, where do we start when we want to build these bridges with others?
Well, it begins with your attitude. Attitude determines approach. Approach determines success or failure. So you have to have an attitude of humility. Jesus said to assume the lower place and then be invited up. So when you walk into a room or a situation, assume that there are people smarter than you there, more experienced than you are there, more distinguished than you are there, and you know, build a relationship from that perspective. Humility, it takes empathy, you know, and unfortunately we live in a society that's suffering from a deficiency of empathy. Empathy is about understanding the state of the other's existence, And, you know, like you say, walk a mile in my shoes. Empathy is facilitated by conscience. Conscience is that arbiter of moral judgment. So when I know your context, when I know your story, your history, it empowers me with understanding and appreciation.
Right. And the basics of debate, I remember hearing you say this before, the basics of debate is knowing the other side. It's not just holding on to your side. So it is important to learn that context and to learn what the other side is feeling.
Yeah, and that, again, that's why finding common ground opens a pathway to communication. That's the basis for life and relationship and success. So empathy is critical. And, you know, it is another passage, if I may quote.
You may quote.
Hebrews 13:3, where it says, remember those in prison as though you were one of them.
That's good.
And it means put yourself in the position of the individual so that you understand and appreciate their context. So humility, empathy, a spirit of collaboration. You know, it's important that we work together. Collaboration expands your knowledge base. It holds you accountable.
Right.
And then moral courage, the willingness to take moral action despite the risk or consequences.
Right. You've been able to politically do something that a lot of us in this room and watching might struggle with, but it's not uncommon. We have some photos of you with various political leaders, whether it be the Bush family or the Clinton family, or it's Michael Bloomberg or Senator John McCain. What you've been able to do is sit down at the same table with opposing leaders, whether they're independents, Democrats, or Republicans. What is your mindset when you're going into these meetings with opposing leaders, and what is your role within that meeting? But how do you even enter that room?
Well, gosh, look at these photos. This is culture. Culture is, and our church is Christian Cultural Center. So I live and thrive at the intersection of faith and culture, which is a tension that I hope we get to talk about for believers, for those who participate in the faith. But this is culture. Culture is the totality of the personality and character of a society. It's traditions, the beliefs that it passes from one generation to another. It's attitudes, the intellectual and emotional disposition of the society. It's customs. It's practices that it engages in, and it's institutions. Those institutions reflect the culture and the language that it speaks to communicate and represent that culture.
Right.
So as a person of faith, especially in the context of my Christianity, my responsibility is to urge culture, especially those in positions of power, to measure their judgments and their decisions against God's perspective of the nature and ordering of human society.
But it's important, you're at least getting to the table, and a lot of us have a hard time even doing that.
This is about trust. Trust is what gets you there. Every relationship is based on trust. If there is no trust, there's no real relationship. So you build trust by consistency, by your integrity, by the reputation that you build over time. And when people trust you, and you've got to bring something to the table,
Right.
So it's a perspective that I bring to the table that I'm invited. And there's a story behind every one of these photos.
There is. I'm excited to hear. I'm excited to hear some more of these stories, but I want to ask you in particular. I lived in New York for 9 years, and if you've watched the news, paid attention to it a little bit, you know that there's a very fractured relationship between Mayor Bill de Blasio and the NYPD. And I want you to tell us, we have a photo of you meeting with Bill de Blasio. You've met with the mayor on multiple occasions, but in this particular instance, can you tell us what some of those tensions were and how you were able to work through those, not just with the mayor, but also with the NYPD? Tell us what was going on in the city at the
So you want me to take you behind the scenes?
Yeah, that's what we want you to do. Take us
Okay.
in the room. We need to
How
know
can I
how to
do this?
navigate. It's so difficult to navigate this, and you have done it so beautifully. So take us in the room and tell us exactly how you did it.
Well, again, I see my responsibility as salt and light to speak into the culture, to speak to those in power, and help them rethink what they do, measure their judgments and their decisions. So I'll give you two illustrations. One we talked about with Mayor de Blasio when he was at odds with the New York City Police Department. I have more than 275 police officers who are members of my congregation. So I understand their position. I have a relationship with the police department. I've sat on their board, their advisory board, and worked with different police commissioners. So that relationship between the mayor and police is very important. So it had gotten pretty ugly where in
Yeah, it
one
got
occasion they
very
turned
ugly.
their back literally
We're
on
keeping it
camera.
PG. It was very ugly.
Yeah.
Right.
So I spoke to a very influential police brass, and we had a conversation so I could understand, where he was coming from. And then I called the mayor and I said, Mayor, let's have lunch, let's have breakfast, whatever. Let's have a meal, let's talk. And he trusted that. And we sat down and we had a very important conversation. And I was able to just adjust his lens enough that he could approach it with a different perspective.
But you wouldn't have been able to adjust his lens had you not built some form of a relationship with him and reached out in the past. You had built a relationship with the mayor.
Yeah,
at this
yeah.
point.
You have to build trust, build relationship. I mean, relationship is a network for life. God gives us relationships for a special reason, and that is to exercise influence in a positive way and towards the common good. So I saw my responsibility to use my relationship with the mayor to build a bridge between these opposing forces. And I made some comments to him. We had a long conversation, and I gave him some parables, and he said, you know, I didn't see it like that, and that's why I appreciate. And the relationship began to change. With Mike Bloomberg, we had a very powerful situation take place in the city. It was a powder keg that was waiting to explode. There was a young man named Sean Bell, and he was celebrating a bachelor party at a club in the city, and he ended up in a situation. There were plainclothes police officers there. Very quickly, he ended up in a vehicle, and a report came that he was armed, and the individuals with him. Police, plainclothes police, they approached the vehicle, right, and then opened fire and emptied their weapons, killing Sean Bell and seriously injuring others who were in the vehicle. This set off an incredible tension within the city. So Mayor Michael Bloomberg at the time, he called a meeting with community leaders, and I was there with him and Police Commissioner Kelly. And as we sat in the meeting, you could hear the hostility, the anger, the resentment because of this excessive use of force. So the mayor was in a situation where he couldn't turn on his police officers, right? But at the same time, he had to stand up for the community that he served, that elected him. So we were about to go out to a press conference, and I leaned over and I said, okay, you know what's going to have to happen here. I said, you're going to have to let the commissioner take the heat, and you're going to have to give a visceral response to this. And he didn't answer me. We walked out, did the press conference, and he said, it seemed like the excessive use of force by these police officers, but we have an ongoing investigation that will continue. That quickly shut down the desire for certain elements, special interest groups, to start a riot, to ignite and inflame the city into conflict and racial violence. So that was a very important moment that was happening behind the scenes.
There's so many instances where the trust has been violated, and there's just a culture of mistrust and distrust. So within an organization, how can you take steps towards rebuilding that trust when that trust has been so deeply violated? What is the first step?
Yeah, you begin by giving hope, towards some future goal and objective that you can all work towards.
Something that you agree on? Is this the finding the
Agreement
one
is a place
thing
of
that
power. So
Okay.
you find a place or a subject or an issue where you can agree. And then that's where you begin to build. It's about keeping your word. It's about integrity. All of those elements are so important when it comes to trust.
And I think I just want to go back to that. I think that's a really important point when you don't know where to start and you might be paralyzed by the divisiveness. Just that's a great place to start. Something that you have in common. And when you actually peel back the layers, we have so much more in common than we have, that there's more that unites us than divides us. But just finding one thing in common, is that often how you initiate the conversation? We're going to talk about something that we have in common, and that gets everybody to the table, and that's what you're working towards, instead of everything that you're working against. Is that the best way to get to the table to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, look, the climate in our nation right now, people are busy taking sides. You're either for me, against me, you
Right.
agree with me politically and socially, or
People
you
are
don't.
drawing the lines, and it makes it difficult.
Yeah, but what happens, and the pendulum swings from the two extremes, left to right. That's the cycle. Those are the seasons that are common to life. It doesn't spend that much time in the middle, the pendulum. But what happens when you have the proliferation of extremes, it expands the middle. So there are more people in that middle ground who are willing to have a conversation, to talk about it. I was doing a town hall meeting in Knoxville, Tennessee with Dr. Martin Luther King's daughter, a woman, Nona Jones, who works for Facebook. She's their faith-based
She's faculty.
initiative, right?
She's faculty.
And we had a conversation in a very tense environment of racial tension within Knoxville, Tennessee. This was a month ago. And we had a very strong conversation, but it was a conversation. It was respectful. It was civil. And we talked about the fact that the only way we're going to move forward in a very divided society is to have these conversations. But a point that I made is that the voice of the people is not necessarily the mind of the people. The voice of the people has been hijacked by, sorry, no offense, media.
I agree with you. I agree with you on that one, unequivocally.
Elected officials, special interest groups, and you know, political parties.
Right.
And even clergy, all right? They're guilty of hijacking. So these are the entities that have taken over the voice of the people, but that voice of the people is not the mind of the people. There is greater division in Washington amongst politicians than there is on the ground where we the people are. I travel, I talk to people, and people want to get along. They want to move forward. They want to find solutions. And that's what gives me hope and encouragement. So let's find the common ground where we can start having a conversation and build bridges of relationship.
That's good. I love that you're just giving us great advice as to where we can even start, because it can be so discouraging and disheartening. And then we just throw our hands up in the air and just say it's not worth it. So what happens if you leave the table and your head is shaking? You leave the table and you haven't agreed on anything. Then what?
It's okay. I mean, people walked away from Jesus when they didn't agree with his message, and he loved them, you know, but understood where they were coming from, and he allowed them to make that decision. You're not going to convince everybody. You just need to convince enough of the right people in order to effect change.
That's great. So we know that you'd go where a lot of people don't want to go, to Washington and these divisive political arenas, but you really have done such a great job of breaking bread with faith leaders, whether they're Jewish or they're Muslim. We have photos of you meeting with several of the popes, photos of you meeting with Arab leaders, Muslim leaders, the leader of Israel. Why is it so important for you as a faith leader to break bread with other faith leaders who may not have your same religious ideology?
You know, society requires two things: civil order. That's government, those are institutions, et cetera. But society also requires a moral value consensus. And that's what religion brings to society. That's what leads us towards justice and concord within the society. So I look to engage other faiths. And the reason I can do that is because I'm secure in my own faith.
Yes.
You know, when I was a black Muslim, we were on the street. We used to eat Christians for breakfast because Christians didn't know what they believed. They couldn't represent their faith. They didn't,
That's
you know,
interesting.
they couldn't represent.
What was your perception of Christians? Because you were Muslim for 5 years before you converted to Christianity because of televangelist Nicky Cruz, correct?
Right.
Okay, so what was your perception of Christians
My perception of Christians?
when you were a Muslim?
Well, Christianity was the white man's religion. Jesus was white. Had certain good elements to it, but Christians were, as far as I'm concerned, weak in terms of really understanding their Jesus, who they believed in, why they believed, you know, their understanding of the world, the shaping of their worldview. So, you know, that's how I looked at Christians.
And that has that perspective.
And you Christians, don't get upset with me. This is BC, before Christ.
Before your conversion, right?
Okay, yeah,
BC,
before
Before your
conversion.
conversion. So ultimately, you have this perspective and perception of the Christian faith. Again, you were Muslim for 5 years. Ultimately, why did you convert?
But you know what? It's my conversion did not come by way of the institution of Christianity, the institution of the church. It came by way of the person, Jesus Christ. That person intrigued me, transformed me deeply and profoundly. Even though I was involved in, I'm a 60s kid. So I grew up in a decade where there was every imaginable revolution taking place in the United States and around the world, but especially here in our nation. The civil rights movement. You know, I was part of the desegregation program following Brown versus the Board of Education. So I was bused from my black neighborhood, black and brown neighborhood in Brooklyn, in Bedford-Stuyvesant and Bushwick, Brooklyn, out to white schools in Queens. So I grew up in two contexts. And I learned quickly how to build relationships within each of those contexts. So I was comfortable in my blackness, my Afro-Latino-ness, if I could coin a word. You know, Jesus was comfortable in his Jewishness. He identified as a Jew, even though he knew his mission was beyond his own people. So it is not an extreme ethnocentrism. It is an appreciation from my own cultural context. And it doesn't prohibit or disqualify anybody else's. So, you know, that's where I grew up. So growing up also without a father, you know, my mom did the best to raise me. And the Nation of Islam presented order, discipline, strength, identity, things that as a young man with the energy that I had and the social consciousness that I had needed. But I never bought into the ideology that the white man was the devil. I understand that systems and structures are run by people, and they could be of any color, you know, so we have to deal with those systems and structures. And I knew intuitively, when I was younger, intuitively, that God, truth, and reality were synonymous. So if I found one, the other two should be present. I didn't find all three in the nation. Again, I found a truth, a way, a life, but not the truth, the way, or the life. So I did not find the ultimate reality that I found in Jesus. So the night that I got saved, am I talking too much here?
No, I love hearing about your conversion. And actually,
So-
didn't you just bump into Nikki Cruz recently?
What's that?
Did you just bump into Nikki Cruz?
Yeah, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. My son Jamal and I, we had dinner with Nikki. I talked about Nikki because that night was impacting. January 11th, 1975, you know, I was invited to a meeting. My wife and I were invited to a meeting where the former leader of the Mau Mau gangs down in Fort Greene was sharing his story. I said, wow, that should be cool. Let me go check this out. So I went, and he preached in broken English. I could hardly understand him. That's why the anointing is really great in his life, I think, to make up for the language. But he shared his heart.
Right.
And something happened to me that night. Two things, Paula, that I heard intuitively. It wasn't an audible voice, but just an internal understanding that came to me supernaturally. Number one, I'm the God that you're looking for. I knew it was Jesus. That became settled. There was no doubt whatsoever. I would now have to explore that. But the second thing was critical. I and my word are one. You see, those words took me away from the iconography of Jesus, the paintings, the pictures that I saw of him throughout history and in different cultures, because whatever culture, he looked different, right? It erased all of that and took me to Scripture. So I met Jesus in his word, and his word became the Logos and the eternal Christ to me in a very deep and profound way.
That's beautiful.
And that's where I began to grow.
So a lot of people watching this will say, yes, AR, Reverend, you have so much influence in the political sphere and in the celebrity sphere and in the religious sphere, but why do I need to go to the tension and the conflict? Why is it up to me to go to the tension and the conflict? Some people aren't comfortable going to the tension and conflict. Should we all be willing to step out of our comfort zone and step into that tension and conflict?
We live in the tension whether we engage it or not. Me, I love the tension. I thrive in the tension.
I like conflict too, so.
Well,
I'm
we
okay
talked
with
about
it,
that.
yes,
Yeah.
but some people are very uncomfortable with it.
Someone says tension over here. I'm going to go check it out. So let's see what the tension. What is the tension about? But think about this. Those of us who believe in and participate in the kingdom of God and the lordship of Christ are immediately put into a tension. Jesus said, I pray not that you take them out of the world, but in the world, protect them from the evil one. He said, they are in the world, but not of the world. That creates a tension. Then it says, go into all the world and preach, teach, make disciples, be salt and light. So all of that language creates a tension. It puts me in the tension between two things, separation and assimilation. Separation has to do with my distinctiveness in Christian identity from the culture and its influence on my faith. Assimilation has to do with me constructively engaging that culture as a representative of the Christian faith. So I'm living between the need to be different, all right, and live the Christian difference, and at the same time, the need to be a part of and constructively engage the society that I live in, that I work in, that I play in, that I raise my family in, that I do whatever I do in. And that's difficult, you know, but it's something, it's not impossible.
Right.
And if you intentionally understand it and work within it, because it raises questions. How much do I adjust to the culture without compromising my Christian beliefs? How far do I blend into the culture without losing my Christian identity?
In it, but not of it, right?
Yeah,
That's always a tough balance.
should I get involved in politics? Should I impose my Christian values on the society that I live in? All of these questions come into play, and this tension has existed from the inception of Christianity in the Roman Empire, and even prior to that, because we're a Judeo-Christian faith, when the Jews were exiled into Babylon and then into Persia, they were faced with the same tension.
Right.
How do they maintain their Jewish identity and at the same time function within the society? And that's the wonderful passage, Jeremiah 29, you know, says, settle down, build houses, plant gardens, marry your children, you know, pray for the peace and prosperity of the city, because if it prospers, you'll prosper. So there is a relationship between us and the culture in which we live.
I want to ask, because you've been building bridges for decades, which one has been the toughest to build?
Building
for you?
bridges?
Which bridge has been the absolute toughest for you to build?
The most difficult bridge, wow, they've all had their challenges.
Yeah. That might be it. That might, in and of itself, might be the answer.
Yeah,
it's not easy to build bridges.
Yeah, wait, are you thinking about an entity, a person?
Anything.
Or
political,
or
religious,
situation.
putting yourself in that situation where you're trying to build a bridge.
You know, I think the most difficult has been to change the image of Christianity in the minds and eyes of those who have been either hurt by it or have grown up in a context that sees it as the enemy. Dealing with sincere ignorance, willful ignorance, culturally induced ignorance, especially around issues of black and white, those have been the most challenging.
I have really appreciated, have you guys appreciated his candor and honesty? If you're familiar with the Reverend, you know that he often uses a blackboard to illustrate his point. So I want you to close us out. And what would you say to young, aspiring leaders? What would be your advice to new leaders, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a diagram and illustration? Yeah, on the blackboard right behind you. We've got a couple markers for you if you want to write that out for us.
Gosh, okay.
You mind?
Let's see.
We got to stand up. This is something that Reverend often does with he and his son during many of his sermons and talks.
I think this is the greatest challenge right here. Change is the only constant in life.
That's right.
It's the essence of maturation. Change is about movement from one level to another, stage to another. Change can move you from a place of comfort to a place of discomfort. But change is necessary. And when change is necessary, not to change becomes destructive. Truth is the only agent that really affects true change. All truth is confrontational because truth confronts our words, our thoughts, our motives, our actions, our attitudes, our choices. The Bible reveals the personhood of God, the plans and purposes of God, the origin, purpose, and destiny of humanity and the universe, but it also is a book of patterns, principles, precepts, seasons, cycles, structures, systems, that if understood properly and applied, it can result in a successful life, successful business, successful relationship, successful marriage and family. You know, I think about all the speakers that I got a chance to listen to.
It's been pretty
They
phenomenal.
found the principles that work, and they worked those principles, and they were successful. But managing continuity and change is the challenge. Knowing what to change and what to continue is the greatest challenge. Because if you change what you should continue, you'll lose your identity. If you continue what you should change, you become irrelevant. So managing those two, that process is important. How do you do it? Your systems, all right? How things are arranged in your life, in your work, in your business, the structures, how everything works together and complements each other, and understanding when you have to pivot, when you have to do things differently. Jesus said it's hard to put new wine into old wineskins, and that is so true. So you have to be willing to change and pass judgment on the old in order to embrace the new. And we live in a society where the past is dismissed and said it's irrelevant. But no, the past and its successes become the foundation for imagining the future that we can build on that successful past.
Reverend Bernard, it has been an honor to learn from you. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Warm welcome for the
Well,
Reverend.
thank you.
Everyone. Thank you.
Didn't miss one of the key elements of all of the amazingness that just came out of that conversation, the idea that transformation and change does not happen as a result of institutions. It happens as a result of relationships, of people just like you who are willing to step up, invest in yourself, do the work, and build the bridge. So many great insights from both AR and Paula there. Thank you to both of you for such an amazing conversation there. Now, you can pick up both AR and Paula's books in the shop. If you're on the GLS Online Experience, click on Shop at the top. It will take you to all of the books where all of our faculty. Paula has actually just recently released a paperback version of her book called Out. It also includes a free 6-week discussion guide and a personal epilogue, so make sure you go and check that out. And then just a little while ago, I teased a little bit for you that Juliet Funt has released her book called A Minute to Think today at the Summit. We would love for you to go and check that out, because if you buy that through the Global Leadership Network, which is actually a little bit less expensive than if you do it through Amazon, so little pointer there. If you do that through Global Leadership Network, you will actually get a special offer and be able to sit in on a GLS exclusive Q&A with Juliet. And I know after you hear from her in just a minute, you're going to want to continue to learn from her. So without further ado, make sure you go and check out the shop in a bit. But for right now, please welcome to the stage, Juliet Funt.
Are there times when you just need a minute to think? The mayhem of work and life can easily deprive us of the energy we need to maximize our talents and creativity. You need the permission, framework, and specific direction to regain control of our overloaded, overcaffeinated, inbox-worshipping workday and find your precious minutes. Here to help us is the founder and CEO of the Juliet Funt Group, Juliet Funt. Juliet has been advisor to Spotify, National Geographic, Pepsi, Nike, Wells Fargo, and ESPN. And she's regularly featured by outlets like Forbes and Fast Company. Her first book, A Minute to Think, Reclaim Creativity, Conquer Busyness, and Do Your Best Work, releases today at the Global Leadership Summit. In this talk, Juliet Funt will help you apply 4 time-tested ways that you and your team can reclaim strategic pauses in your work and life. That's why the Global Leadership Summit is thrilled to play you this moment from Juliet Funt.
I never learned to make a fire when I was a kid. It's not one of the core skills of growing up in Manhattan. Now, did I learn the art of trick-or-treating floor to floor by elevator? Oh, you bet. Could I masterfully fold and tilt a slice of raised pizza so all the grease slid into my napkin before I ate it? By the age of 3. But as an apartment-dwelling kid, unless something goes terribly, terribly wrong, you never learn to build a fire. And as I grew up, fire-making skills continued to elude me. I gave it a try. Beaches with bonfires or camping with an outdoorsy boyfriend, but I never mastered how to get the flames started. Many years and 3 kids later, my husband, our boys, and I went to a little cabin near Big Bear Lake, not far from our home in LA. The journey there was a typical boys in the backseat road trip. They were alternating between 2 games. Which would you rather? Lick a street after a parade or eat a toothpick? And the ever-popular escalating competition of, does this hurt? So the cabin was worth the drive, and it was tucked into this beautiful little woodsy area with giant windows, and it had a wide, stately stone fireplace calling for something to be ignited. The boys were so excited at the prospect they were bouncing, but we had no wood or expertise, and my husband had run into town. So I did what city folks tend to do in any area of knowledge lack. I found a coach. There was a little sign. It said, text for firewood drop-offs in 10 minutes. It was right next to an unforgettably titled newsletter from the local chiropractor called The Spinal Column. And I sent the text, and instantly Charlie arrived. And he told me, and my chanting, bobbing, amped-up pyromaniac offspring, that when you start a fire, layers are best. A little paper first, some dry pine needles over the grate, and then a few chunks of fire starter, followed by 2 types of wood, soft wood to catch quick and hard wood to burn long. But he forgot to mention one critical ingredient: space. We constructed a dense pile of every fuel source known to man, and then we hurled matches at it unsuccessfully for 20 minutes before my husband returned. He lovingly took the mangled matchbook from my hands, and he began to redesign our stack. He fluffed the pine needles, staggered the fire starter, and TP'd the wood to create the perfect passages for oxygen to feed the fire. And then, with exactly 1 match, it was roaring. The boys roasted a whole bag of marshmallows, and I learned something valuable. It's the space between the combustibles that fire can't live without. The space is what makes the flames ignite and stay burning. But we forget this law of nature in every area of our lives beyond the hearth, especially at work. Our schedules are packed like a winning game of Tetris, and our minds are overflowing into all of these note-taking apps. We try to bring our best spark every day, but there's no oxygen to feed the fire. I call this missing space that I'm describing white space, and the name came from looking at literal white spaces on a paper calendar and realizing that those little unscheduled places were an indication of how much possibility that day could hold. How do you access it? You take a strategic pause. Stop what you're doing, and white space will rush in. And I've spent the last 20 years teaching people and organizations to make this oxygenating space a reality in order to reclaim creativity, conquer busyness, and do their best work. To simply take a minute to think, a minute to breathe, or to step back and realign with themselves. But right now, we are in the most unique window of opportunity for thoughtfulness that I've ever experienced. Every executive in every country, everywhere, is talking about the return to the office, the next normal. And the talk that's heard from conference room to virtual platforms is all about where. Where will teams sit every day? Where will real estate be sold or kept? Where, this is a fascinating one, where will managers need special training to counter their unconscious bias against workers who work in one where versus another? These are pivotal thoughts to explore. The where question is, in fact, the second most important topic about the next normal. But it's not the first. The conversation being ignored, in fact, the single most essential discussion to have is about the how. Because this reboot of work that's happening right now is giving us a spectacular opportunity to change the way work feels, to give us an opportunity for behavioral redesign. Now, I wouldn't say we have a blank page to write on, but it's close. Right now, we can investigate and we can shatter decades of unquestioned how before the jello sets up and becomes the new status quo. Our assignment is this. In what ways can we transform work so it's no longer the hardest part of people's lives? So, in order to not miss this profound opportunity, leaders need to stop the presses, sit down, and think, and ponder, and mull, and dream. They must envision the future of the how that they want to build within the new where. In the past times that we've been together, my darling GLS friends, we've explored the use of white space for the individual. Today, we're going to look at white space for teams. I'm going to teach you 4 ways that you can take a minute to think together, matching each one with a tool or practice that can profoundly affect your new how. I told you that taking a pause is the way that you summon white space. You can do this in 4 ways. You can take a pause to recuperate. You can take a pause to reflect. You can take a pause to reduce. You can take a pause to construct. All of them are better together. When teams decide that these nourishing practices will be part of their norms, everything they care about is amplified. It's like a bike team that's pulling each other along by drafting. The work is less when we do it together. Using the pause to recuperate. Although it's only one of the 4 uses of the strategic pause, this is what most people assume white space is at first. This is when we use white space to reboot our exhausted brains and bodies. It looks like this. And clearly, we needed this before the pandemic, but boy, howdy, do we need it now. Every heart-centered leader I've spoken to in the last months has given their exhausted teams a wellness day, or even 2. Bumble just gave its 700 workers a full week off. Extra days off are the right thing to do and a good start. But they're no more the ultimate solution than giving a starving man a quarterly binge. We need a daily reprieve. We need routines that show up in real life, in real work every day. I want you to design your new how with recovery and recuperation in the workflow, not just in a single compensatory 24 hours. One simple tool will give you the helpful structure you need, the wedge. So the wedge is a small portion of open time inserted between 2 activities. It is used specifically to pry apart actions or events that without it would have been connected. And the wedge buys you a moment to think, plan, or compose yourself, and when applied as a team, it dramatically lowers stress and it can help us preserve equilibrium and focus. The wedge always has bookends and is typically short. And while the wedge can be used in other situations to gain clarity or compose ourselves or follow creative thought, here we're going to use it just for a sip of rest. You can take a little wedge between arriving at your desk and diving in, between one meeting and the next, between checking email and responding, between noticing a wave of exhaustion and reaching for coffee, sugar, or digital stimulants. Rest brings up an interesting amount of emotion. Guilt, shame, envy, self-consciousness. Did I mention guilt? Look at your own emotions right now as we discuss it. To use the wedge as a team, we must eradicate the shame of rest and replace it with the pride of self-care. To take the steps we need to recuperate, we're going to have to do one other thing as well. We must take ownership of our exhaustion. We must accept that there is no they doing it to us anymore. Yes, in big companies, the corporate mothership can make life harder, but by and large, our driving pace and pressure has become fully internalized. We have to own this, and we have to give ourselves permission to change it. It's a funny thing about that word, permission. When I was editing the book I just wrote, I noticed that the word permission occurs 31 times in the book. I probably could have used it more, because that is what we need, permission and permission and permission and permission to just allow ourselves a little space. This practice of the wedge can and should be accompanied by teams asking themselves together some questions that protect them from further burnout. How and when can we truly clock out each day? What are the times before and after we will not take calls? What's our official agreement about disconnected vacations and PTO days? And are we as leaders modeling these replenishing behaviors? Using the pause to reflect. The next, using the pause to reflect, gives us the stepping back time that breeds objectivity about our work and takes first ideas to the next level. This is the time for decision-making without distraction, and also for understanding what's happening around you and within you. This is why Phil Knight of Nike had a special chair in his living room only for daydreaming. This reflection time is essential for leaders who want to create a thoughtful how. And critically, they will need to accept help from their teams in crafting that destination. When my famous dad, Alan Funt, interviewed kids for the Candid Camera Show, the very first reality TV show ever, he had a challenge. How could he quickly break through the intimidation felt by a little child toward a big unknown adult? He did so by lighting a match and feigning difficulty in blowing it out. Balanced on the edge of a preschool-sized chair, he'd huff and puff with great theatrical overacting. And he would turn finally to the youngster and say, "Can you help me?" And they would. And moments later, he and his new pal would be chatting away about topics like guardian angels, money, or the wonders of spaghetti. Like my dad, leaders need to remove the power distance that interferes with honesty, but unlike him, we should not feign need of assistance as we would with a child, but rather connect with and admit to the real need that we have for input. We must put aside the hubris that can creep onto leaders and directly ask our teams what part of the current how gets in the way of their best work and what we can do to change it. Just ask them and then really listen, and go a few rungs down from the people you usually ask for advice. The framing that's helpful here, as you then blend your thoughts and the feedback you receive, is to imagine the legacy you would want and then work backwards. Take a minute to think about it. There will be a point when you're done being a leader. However long or short your run has been, you will leave a legacy behind you. Toasts at your retirement party will be based upon it. Legacy is a story about you, yet to be written, but it's a tale for which you hold the pen. So leaders, in your reflective pause, take out a piece of paper and a pen, not the computer, and write a legacy letter to yourself. Describe specifically the way you would like it to feel when you're looking back, and then use that as your how blueprint going forward. But you can't fully craft that legacy unless you know the future that each individual team member dreams of as well. So ask each of them to imagine that the future that they would love to live in, describe it in a letter, and share it back with you. Stepping forward and looking back. Using the pause to reduce. The third flavor of the practice is using the pause to reduce. To take a minute to think about ways to mathematically lessen the waste work on your plate, emails and meetings and slides and reports and paperwork and processes. Used together as a team, a pause to reduce allows you to let go of what's unnecessary and arrives like a bulldozer making room for everything else. We spend a lot of time on this subject with our clients because in our research, we see that low-value work costs the typical company $1 million for every 50 employees in misused talent time. This is like if you let 12 out of every 50 people lie around all day eating Doritos and playing video games. I'm going to teach you a special application of the reductive pause as it relates to one area of this waste specifically, meetings. First, let's be honest. Meeting waste was bonkers before the pandemic. We often saw 30% of our clients' meetings reported as time that they were neither contributing or benefiting. But COVID just took it off the rails. And we need some objectivity on how mad this has been. Yeah, necessary, but just mad. Imagine if one of those fancy New York recruiters 2 years ago had to entice a prospect to take a job with the work conditions that you've just survived. Well, you'll be on Zoom calls from around 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. You're going to need to learn to stare into a tiny camera lens and pretend you're making eye contact with a human being. And it will be so hard to take a bio break that your best bet is to wait for a really chatty person, mute, pee, and return to unmute before they miss you. Oh, by the way, pro tip, double check the mute. It's been a tragedy and a comedy. But we're troopers and we adapted, and so here we are. But if we go into this new how, we need to take a collective minute to think and find some way to unwrite these new healthy norms. And I have just the tool for you to do it. It's called SBH, which stands for Shouldn't Be Here. To use it, we're going to begin by tracking boredom. If you're bored in a meeting, it may be unavoidable. It may be simply part of the job. Or if you let yourself listen to it, boredom may become valuable evidence that you're in the wrong place at a particular moment. When we digitally multitask, we mute this instructive type of boredom. We entertain ourselves with screen time instead of asking questions like, why am I bored? Am I the wrong person to be here? Am I redundant with other peers in the room? Is all of the content something I could have just read? So if you're sitting in a meeting that feels boring and you abstain from device distractions, you don't touch them, you will see your situation more clearly. You'll either determine that work is hard and sometimes boring, but you do serve a purpose in this meeting, or you will determine that you're neither contributing nor benefiting. And when the latter happens, take a strategic pause and say inside your head, SBH, shorthand for shouldn't be here. Repeat this term to yourself privately throughout the portions of any meeting that feels empty. And as you hear this message over and over, it's going to raise awareness, it's going to chip away at costly denial, and eventually spur action. Oh, but make sure you only say it inside your head. We hear more wins from the subtle tool of SBH than almost any other meeting technique. Best practice with team members is to work on your own SBH habits and then also make time for a group review of everybody's shouldn't be here insights. Doing this together, we move from common sense, where we all intellectually know that many meetings are a waste, to common practice, where we actually cancel or decline attendance in the meetings we don't belong in. Using the pause to construct. The fourth type of pause, using the pause to construct, is thoughtfulness as a generative business tool. This is where we make things in our minds, hatching products and developing plans and concocting ideas. During a constructive pause, our thinking might not be a greyhound dashing in a straight line to the finish, but it might be more like a butterfly, stopping at unpredictable places before eventually returning with nectar. And the flexibility I'm describing is essential to the desired outcome. Because when we're stuck on a problem, we often keep running through the same associations and options. But by pausing, we experience what scientists describe as beneficial forgetting. I love that term. We just disconnect from unhelpful associations and replace them with new, unique solutions, which is exactly what we want. The legendary John Cleese, co-founder of Monty Python, is the man who brought us Silly Walks, A Fish Called Wanda, and Basil Fawlty. I had the enormous honor to speak to him about his use of unscheduled time, which was a passion of his when he taught businesses and executives to improve their creativity. In his view, there are two types of work: what he calls the open mode, creative, flowing, unstructured, and the closed mode, executing, doing. Cleese believes one must step into the open mode, what we would call a pause to construct, for a healthy chunk of time, ideally 90 minutes, in order for your mind to sift through the first flurry of distractions and then really clear the ground for play. But even in shorter time periods, he gave me a constructive tool that has been the single most influential one for me in my own creative practice since the day he shared it. There's a story that he tells about him and the other Pythons during the rich early days of their creative process. One of the other members had great ideas, but not as fresh as John's. Cleese attributed the difference to the speed with which they would embrace an idea. When this other performer would come up with a sketch or a punchline, if it was a good, solid idea, they'd use it. Not so with Cleese. When he would come up with a good idea, he would note it, set it aside, and keep exploring. And if another idea came, he would note it, set it aside, and keep exploring. As a person, myself, who has the impulse control of a 2-year-old, I have found this set-aside process just to be instrumental in my own creative pursuits ever since I first heard it. So set aside your good thought to see if a great one follows. You can use this practice together to access richer veins of thought about the next how. Ideate, set aside, and keep going together. Create, set aside, and keep going deeper, braver, further. This new how that we've been discussing can be your playground. It can be anything you choose, but you'll need to understand one thing about people to build it effectively. Come with me to Newark Airport. It is 1969, back in the day of the smoking and non-smoking section of the plane where the magic invisible wall would keep the smoke from crossing over. And I'm on a flight with my mother, my father, and my brother. My father, Alan Funt, from the Candid Camera television show. And we're on this flight for about 20 minutes when all of a sudden a man stands up and takes out a really big knife and puts it up to the throat of one of the flight attendants and walks her all the way down the aisle into the cockpit. A moment later, the pilot came on and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are being hijacked. We are rerouting this plane for Havana, and we will keep you posted." And I was only a baby at the time, but I was told that the people on this flight were all just frozen, just paralyzed, waiting. Except for this one woman who instead was going like this. At my father. And all of a sudden, with great inappropriate glee, she popped off her seatbelt and she stood up and she said, "Oh my gosh, we're not being hijacked, we're on candid camera!" And everybody believed her, and they all believed her. And the stewardesses started popping champagne from first class. People are in line for autographs, and my dad is on his knees. He's saying, "Please, we would not do a scary stunt like this, please." And they're laughing, they're talking, they're totally ignoring him. My dad sees a priest in the back row. He runs to him, he says, "Please, Father, help me convince these people." And the priest says, "You can't get me, Alan Funt." So when we got to Cuba, they caught the guy, they sent us home, all was well, and here's what's clear. When people think together, it's hard to pull any one of them off the pack. You can call it groupthink or social conformity. It's powerful and it's undeniable, but it's also directable. You and your team can slow down, take a minute to think, and realize that you together can believe any story you want about the next how. And that minute to think can lead to 2, and then 3, and then a whole new thoughtful way of doing business. A big hug to each and every one of you, and thanks for having me.
I walked into prison over 37 years ago expecting to die. Growing up in the household that I come up in, There was simply no love. There was physical abuse and sexual abuse. At the age of 19, I was a teenage drug addict, and I came up with the plan to rob a man. I had no idea that it would lead to a murder. I was sentenced to die by lethal injection. It was a very hopeless place, but I wanted to have a purpose. I wanted to live with something greater than my worst act. I received my first commutation in 2003, which commuted my death sentence to life without parole. And I knew that it was a grace from God. And then at a front seat to the Global Leadership Summit, the summit helped me to see it's more about empowering people rather than being empowered. And I wanted to empower my peers in prison. The Building Block program is based upon 5 core principles, which is respect, responsibility, ownership, community, and empathy. We equip the men and women with the skills and the talents to never return to prison again. So not only is our program affecting the population of prisoners, but it's also affecting staff tremendously. When I found out that the GLS came to us because of the big hearts of people, I was blown away. I couldn't believe I'm getting these resources for free. It was like, man, someone's thinking about me when I'm not even thinking about myself. And I know it's only by the grace of God that I'm here. I'm out because of the tremendous work of the Illinois Prison Project that I now work for as the Director of Education. It is my hope to wake people up to their God-given potential. The Global Leadership Summit taught me how to be the leader that I am today, and I'm so grateful.
Oh, come on, how powerful is that? One more time, let's say thank you that we get to be a part of something so special. And Ronaldo, although I haven't had the chance to shake your hand yet, I was honored to be at a dinner where you spoke. Love and honor to you, man. Love and honor. Love and honor. Ronaldo, love and honor. And it's because of your story and so many like it that it is my honor now to talk to all of you about an opportunity that you have to give. And I want to give you a little behind the scenes, if that's okay. Just a little behind the scenes you may not know. The GLN team provided me with an amazing, helpful, and meaningful script. Like, it's really cool. It's like all scripted out, and all I have to do is read it to you. And I like that because a lot of times I would use that. But as you know, sometimes leaders go off script, right? Sometimes leaders go off script. And so I want to do that today. My assignment was, and I'm happy to, tell you and remind you of the Summit impact stories that you've seen, like Ronaldo's, like High's, like the story of the lady that we can't even tell you her name or show you her face or tell you where she's from because it's too dangerous, or because of Rebecca's story, who Amy and I do have the privilege of calling a friend who was human trafficked brutally for years, who saw herself as nothing and one day saw herself as something. She saw herself as a leader. And now this incredibly brave woman, if you could just meet her husband like I have and see her kids like I have in a photo and know her story, that her life has been completely changed. And now someone who had no hope is offering hope to thousands of women coming through this. You would see why I'm excited to go off script and tell you, you have an opportunity to give. To stories like that, and those 4 stories would not have happened without people just like you, year over year, giving. Now, off script. I sat in your seat years ago when they called for an offering, and I thought what some of you are thinking, I thought, but didn't I buy a ticket? Didn't I give some money already? That's what I thought. I don't know if any of you would think that, but I thought that. And I'll tell you, if you thought that, I thought it too. And what I've come to learn now that I'm on the inside is that your ticket covers the cost of the event. And let me explain it to you. When this event is over, I'm gonna meet with a team of people, and we're meeting several times this month, and the next month, and month after. There's a whole team of full-time staff members that work all year long to put on what we call an event, but it's not really an event. I want you to think about this. If you've ever, like I have 4 daughters, 3 of whom are married. We did 3 weddings. Dear God, they're expensive, and they're time-consuming, and they're stressful. Just approving of the boy is stressful enough, but the whole wedding thing is amazing. And so if you've ever put on a big event, what we're doing is, this is 535 events going on right now. That's what it is. It's not one event, it's 539 events. Tons of you are at one of those 535 right now. What you give in a ticket goes to pay for the event. It covers the cost. But what you give today, it goes to the fun stuff. It goes to the meaningful stuff. It goes to the stuff that creates the ripple effect that impacts people's life, just like Rebecca. This is where it gets special. And I want to try to describe to you as best I can the ripple effect, and there's no way I can do it. But when you take someone just like Rebecca and you see that generations of her family will be different because of her story, that thousands of women will be different because she sat in a GLS because someone gave and saw herself not as an abused woman, not as a victim, but with dignity, with power, with confidence, and she saw herself as a leader. And so when you give today, and what I wanted to say is, I really hope you do, and I'm talking to you, because it really, really matters, because the opportunity is bigger than ever before. Leadership is more important than ever before, and there are more people that need it more than ever before. And so I hope that more of you will give more than you've given before. You make it possible, Ronaldo, for potential leaders like you in over 100 prisons. 100 prisons. How cool is that? If you're watching right now, you are loved, you are special, you are empowered, and you can make a difference right where you are. And you make it possible for stories like Ronaldo, as well as homeless shelters and transition homes and vulnerable youth and trafficking survivors. It's a ripple effect. Sometimes leaders go off script. And I'm going so off script, I'm gonna call my family, who does not know that I'm calling my family. I did not tell them because I didn't want them to be nervous, but could I have you guys get up quickly? My bride and 2 of my boys, if you guys can come up here. I have 6 kids, and we bring 2 every year. 2 kids get to come, and this is the first year that my 2 sons got to come together. And I want you guys just to come on up here if you can. And this is my bride, my best friend, Amy. This is Stephen. This is Sam. Sam's the biggest, pound for pound. Stephen is the most deadly. Just telling you, he's vicious. And I want you to understand the ripple effect in my family. Imagine me, 25 years or age or so, and I was a pastor, but I never saw myself as a leader. It never registered. One line, one statement, one moment changed my life. Life Church is a result of that moment. The YouVersion Bible app is a result of that moment. Tens of thousands of lives impacted is a result of one moment. August 8, 2008, I sat by Amy, who saw herself as just a mom, which is a stupid just to put in front of anything because that's a pretty dang big deal. But she saw herself as just a mom, and suddenly some people said, you can be a leader. And she stepped up in her leadership and started making a really big difference in our church. A few years later, we sat on row 4, and she got a vision and a burden to do something outside the church and to start transition ministry homes. And she launched her first one knowing nothing about it, but believing that she was a leader and she could do it. Fast forward to today, and there are multiple homes in multiple cities impacting tons and tons and tons of women. And what I want you to know is that right now, at this moment, at one of our Life Church host sites, the staff of her ministry is gathered, the board of her ministry is gathered, and thanks to your generosity, some of the women who are there who could not afford it otherwise are gathered. And what I love about these women, we know many of them, is they've been told for years, you're worthless, you're a criminal, you're an addict, you're nothing. And what they're hearing is they're special, they're valuable, they're chosen, they're called, and you are a leader. And I want you to hear it, ladies, right now. You are a leader. And the ripple effect of what happens in their lives overflows to their overcoming addictions. They're fully employed. They are being reunited with their children. That's what happens. That's what happens when you give. And not only will it impact people like that, but this will be translated into 60 languages, and this will go into hundreds and hundreds of countries of places where people never get any kind of content like this and can be built up and do something special. And as a dad, the reason I'm excited to have you here, Sam has been confidently leading. Stephen's kind of like in his puberty leadership growth spurt. It's amazing. He's 18, and 2 years ago, he was one of the crowd. He's not one of the crowd right now. He is a leader. He's a leader, and you see it all over him. So I just thought, even though I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this in front of 40 million people, I just thought I'd ask you, is there one quote, one line that stood out to you at this event that will stick with you in the years to come?
Man, I'm gonna have to go. I think it was Michelle who said it. It's what's the best that could happen? It's I think before I do anything, I always think through the worst case scenarios. Could I get embarrassed? Could I fail? All these different things. But like a different perspective, like right now I could have just said no, hand you back the microphone, because this is a little terrifying. But like, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of great things that can come from taking risks, getting out of your comfort zone. So what's the best that could happen?
So I'll try to answer that, because Stephen and I have a common challenge, and we're hard on ourselves. And so we were talking recently about how you want to kind of improve the way you see yourself. And so that one line could be a game changer for him. So what's the best that could happen? Well, one thing, it may not be the best, but you could actually inspire some people here to give. And that years later, you could have a story very similar to Ronaldo's, to Rebecca's, or to mine, or to Amy's. And the ripple effect could go on and on and on and on for years to come. It's special. And I want to tell you, you have an opportunity to give today. I'm going to go ahead and turn up the heat here for a moment, and so I'm going to let you guys tell them thank you, and you can go sit back down so you don't have to feel awkward, but thank you. And I love you, and I'm proud of you, and you're the only leader that I kiss. And people say, you guys must love kids. Like, we actually really love each other. We do, but we love each other. And this year, Amy and I are honored to give big again, because we can. Years ago, I gave $20. That was big when I gave it years ago. And both gifts matter. The $20 matters, the big gift matters. Every gift of every size matters, every single gift. Let me give you some thoughts. $25,000, that helps start a summit in a new city. That's pretty amazing. Start a summit in a new city. $75 gives a scholarship to a young leader in a rural village. Every gift of every size matters. When you give, your support funds ministries to translate this all over the world to 130 countries, giving a safe place for people to meet. Thank you for your generosity. Exciting news, really exciting news. We have a handful of really generous people who believe in this that have agreed, are you ready for this? To match, dollar for dollar, if you give $100 or more, they will match what you give up to $1 million. $100 or more, they'll match what you give up to $1 million. That means a gift of $100 is doubled. I'm gonna say this, and Amy can tell you I've never done this ever in my whole life, but I was up last night thinking, and I had a burden, there's someone out there watching this right now, could be here, could be at a site, could be online. You have the capacity to give a very big gift, and you weren't even thinking about it, and you're gonna give that gift. And if you're thinking about it and you have that capacity, I really believe there's someone here, and I just wanna encourage you, let's just do it. Every size, Every gift matters. And if that's you, you were on my mind last night, and I believe you can make a difference. 3 ways you can give. Number 1, you can donate online at givegls.org, givegls.org. Giving online is the safest and best way to give. If you're attending one of our host sites, you are given a handout card with an envelope attached, and you can drop that in the basket as it's passed anytime. Last but not least, you can give online. You have the opportunity to choose an option to join a monthly giving program. So if you'd like to give regularly, you could regularly make a difference. And so those are 3 ways you can make a lasting difference. Again, it's givegls.org. And if you're in the Engagement Hub, you can get the donation right there. And so we have a song coming up. And as you listen to it, I want you to think about the ripple effect of what your giving can do today to make a difference around the world. And I want to thank you for being on an incredible journey with me to build leaders, because we know that everyone wins when the leader gets better.
One wave on the ocean, one drop in a river bend can change the direction of the water again. One smile from a stranger and one gift in a giver's hand can start a chain reaction, starting with compassion. Maybe we can heal this broken land. You and I could be the change that we've been longing to see. If we start a ripple, give them all they need. The answer lives inside you and me. So let's start a ripple. One dream from a dreamer, one word from a leader can lift a whole nation to heights they've never been. One girl with a vision, one boy on a mission can heal the whole world. So let's give them all a chance. You and I can be the change that we've been longing to see. If we start a ripple, give them all they need. The answer lives inside you and me. So let's start a ripple, and the dream will get stronger the more love we give. And the world will get better the more love we give. You and I could be the change that we've been longing to see. If we start a ripple, give them all they need. The answer lives inside you and me. Yeah. So let's start a ripple. You and I could be the change that we've been longing to see. If we start a ripple, give them all they need. The answer lives inside you. The answer lives inside you. The answer lives inside you. So let's start a ripple.
Well, hello, John Legend. That was amazing. You guys give it a round of applause for that performance just now. And that line, change begins inside you and me. That's what it's all about, thinking outside of ourselves. This is a global leadership movement. And think about the power and impact we could make when we take that step, not just for ourselves, but for those around us. And Craig just mentioned how you can give to the development fund. There's instructions on the bottom of your screen, but we want to say thank you to several generous donors who have stepped up to the plate. And they have said, if you give $100 or more, they're going to match that up to $1 million. Let's go, everybody. Let's do this. Let's do this for our global leadership. Let's step outside of ourselves and see the power that we can have. It begins inside you and me.
Yeah, it really does have a great impact, all of your contributions there. Another great impact, obviously what we're doing in this room doesn't stop here. Things that are happening all across the world is the impact that the GLS is having. As a matter of fact, watching along today with us are centers and facilities involved in our prison program. You saw some of that a little bit earlier. Just to call out a few of those and say hello to you. Taylorsville Correctional Center is with us. Angola is with us. Heritage Trail Correctional Facility is with us. I think we've got a photo of Southeast Correctional Center in Missouri as well. And then first time with us is the Gadsden Reentry. You guys are with us, so welcome. And then hello, obviously, to the other 114 sites.
114 sites.
With us today.
That's pretty incredible.
You know, as Craig mentioned just a few minutes ago, speaking, just the insight and not even insight, but just the truth that is, you are all leaders. All of you who are watching, you are all leaders, and your leadership matters.
Yep.
You have a unique opportunity to lead in places where leadership is needed the most. So your contribution matters right where you are. Stay fueled on that.
And we believe that your best is yet to come. It absolutely is. There's some incredible stories that are coming out of these prison ministries. We want to share with you one of those stories from the Walton Correctional Institution in Florida. We actually have a photo of these gentlemen. We heard about your positive discussion around racial reconciliation at last year's GLS, at the GLS 20. And we're just so inspired by your desire to better understand one another. Again, we believe your best days are ahead, and we thank you for taking bold steps in your leadership journey.
Yeah, also another great story coming out of Arkansas Valley Correctional Facility. A resident named Justin actually saw GLS on your education channel. Then created his own mini summit where other residents came to speak, and now you're all joining us via the live digital stream. So welcome to you. So glad that you guys are with us.
Can we just give a big round of applause?
So incredible.
For those
just that people would be inspired to take those steps just by watching and saying, no, this is something that can go to others as well around us. You know, another way you can interact with us and with the GLS, with this community, is through our brand new community hub.
Brand new this year.
Yeah, brand new.
Just for you.
Just for you. So we'd love for you to go and connect over there. They've got roundtable discussions. They'll include different topics across all of our faculty members. You know, kind of these themes that are going through as far as authenticity and taking risks, stepping out, and not allowing the fear to hold you back. You can have all of those discussions over there at the community hub. So make sure you go and dig in there. It's a great way to start talking about how you can take things that you're learning and take that into your communities as well.
Yeah, and just connecting with like-minded leaders. Again, the community hub, there are set hours. We had a great turnout yesterday, so we encourage you to go there at lunch. Again, set hours. Go meet with other people, like-minded, video chat, and just get that conversation going. And we want to know, what dream do you have for your leadership? This is your last opportunity to share with us and Jason. Not your last opportunity to dream. We want you to keep dreaming, but it's your last opportunity to share with Trey and I and Jason. Make sure you share it on social using the hashtag GLS21, and we can't wait to share your dream with others.
That's right. And as you're thinking about those dreams, or they're continuing to roll around in your head, I know that one of the things that helps you think is food.
I'm dreaming about lunch. Anybody else?
So we are going to take a lunch break now, but we will be back here at 1:15 p.m. Central for an amazing closing session. I can't believe we're already almost at the end here, but you do not want to miss Frederick Herron, Bianca Olthoff, Malcolm Gladwell, and then Albert Tate is going to take us home. So watch your clock. We'll see you back here in just a little while.